The night the monster finally spoke, it was March 2005, inside a cold interrogation room in Wichita, Kansas. A man sits across from detectives, calm, clean-shaven, wearing glasses. He looks them straight in the eye and says, "Well, you got me." That man was Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer. BTK stood for bind, torture, kill. For 30 years, he lived among normal people, hiding behind the mask of a church leader, husband, and father. But what Netflix didn't show you is the terrifying truth about how Dennis almost slipped away again, even after he confessed. And trust me, once you hear what really happened, you'll never look at the word normal the same way again. Before we dive deeper into this chilling story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and turn on the notification bell because here, we bring you the real stories Netflix won't tell, the raw truth behind the world's darkest minds. The man who lived two lives, Dennis Rader, was born in 1945 in Kansas, a quiet, small-town boy who looked completely normal. He was polite, respectful, and good with people. But deep inside, something dark was growing. Even as a child, Dennis liked control. He'd tie up small animals just to watch them struggle. He didn't understand why it made him feel powerful, but that feeling stayed with him for life. As he grew older, Dennis built a picture-perfect image. He got married, had kids, joined the church council, and became a Cub Scout leader. To neighbors, he was the kind, responsible family man. But at night, he was someone else. He spent hours sketching disturbing scenes of women tied up. He wrote about his fantasies in secret notebooks. And every detail was planned, down to the rope, the knots, and the timing. Then came January 15th, 1974. A freezing morning in Wichita. Four members of the Otero family were found dead inside their home. Bound, strangled, tortured. The killer left no fingerprints, no DNA, no clues. Only a message that would send chills across Kansas. "I am BTK." The city was in shock. Police hunted for answers. Hundreds of suspects. Thousands of interviews. Nothing. And while Wichita lived in fear, Dennis Rader went about his daily life, smiling, working, and shaking hands with the same officers who were trying to catch him. He was right there, hiding in plain sight. For 3 long decades, BTK seemed to vanish. But 30 years later, one small mistake, something so simple, finally began to tear his perfect disguise apart. The letter that gave him away, it started with a single question. After almost 30 years of silence, BTK wanted to know if the world still remembered him. In 2004, Wichita police received an envelope. Inside was a strange message made of cut-out words and letters, and a photocopy of a driver's license belonging to a woman named Vicki Wegerle, one of BTK's victims from 1986. The message ended with 4 chilling letters, BTK. The detectives froze. BTK was back. For years, they thought the killer was dead, locked up, or maybe just gone. But this letter proved he was alive and watching. And even more shocking, he wanted to talk. Over the next few months, more letters arrived. Each one was taunting. Each one included details that only the real killer could know. Police were desperate to find a clue. But BTK was too smart. Every letter was carefully wiped clean. No DNA, no prints, no trail. Meanwhile, Dennis Rader was sitting comfortably at home, watching news reports about the mysterious BTK letters. He loved the attention. He loved the power. To him, this was his game, and he was winning again. But what Netflix didn't show you is how pride became his biggest mistake. Dennis wanted credit. He didn't want BTK to fade into history. So he decided to start writing to the police directly, sending puzzles, floppy disks, and even cereal boxes with notes hidden inside. In one message, he asked something strange. He wrote, "Can a floppy disk be traced or not? Be honest." The police, pretending to play along, published a fake response through the newspaper. They told him, "No, it's safe to use." And that was all they needed. Days later, a purple floppy disk arrived at the local TV station. It contained a Word document signed by BTK. When investigators checked the file's data, they found something Dennis never noticed, a tiny trace of computer metadata. It revealed the file was last edited by Dennis on a computer at Christ Lutheran Church. The police drove there immediately. And who worked there? Dennis Rader, the church council president. Still, detectives wanted proof before making a move. They secretly took DNA from Rader's daughter's medical records and compared it to evidence from the 1974 Otero murders. It was a perfect match. The man who had fooled the city for 30 years was finally caught by his own computer. The arrest. The moment BTK broke February 25, 2005. A calm Friday afternoon in Wichita, Kansas. Detectives followed a small, tan-colored sedan driving down a quiet street. Behind the wheel was a man who had no idea his 30-year secret was about to end. Dennis Rader, the church president, the city worker, the loving father, and the serial killer who called himself BTK. When officers made their move, Dennis didn't panic. He didn't fight, didn't run. He simply looked at the officer and asked, "What's this about?" The detective replied, "You know what it's about, Dennis." There was silence. Then, Rader sighed, leaned back, and whispered, "Okay." It was over. 30 years of fear, lies, and pain ended in one quiet breath. At the station, detectives placed a folder on the table, filled with photos, letters, and the floppy disk. Rader looked at it, smirked, and said, "Looks like you found the floppy." He admitted everything. Every murder. Every plan. Every moment of control he craved. But what Netflix didn't show you is how calm he was during those confessions. No emotion. No guilt. He described each murder like he was talking about fixing a car or mowing his lawn. Detectives sat frozen, struggling to understand how a man so normal could hide such darkness. He explained how he'd stalk his victims for weeks, study their routines, break into their homes, and wait in silence. He called them his projects. To him, killing was about power, not anger. It made him feel alive. When asked why he stopped killing, Dennis simply said, "I had other things going on in my life." It was chilling, like turning murder into a hobby he'd grown bored of. After hours of confession, the detectives finally asked, "Why did you start sending letters again after so many years?" Rader leaned forward, smiled, and said, "Because I missed the attention." That was the real Dennis Rader, not just the killer, but the man who wanted to be remembered. He didn't just crave control over his victims. He wanted control over his legacy. But little did he know, his story was about to take one last twist, something that even shocked the detectives who thought they'd seen it all. Inside the courtroom, the BTK confession that shocked the world, June 27, 2005. The courtroom in Wichita was silent. Every seat was filled. Reporters, victims' families, and locals who had lived in fear for decades. Everyone was waiting to see the face of the man who called himself BTK. Then the doors opened. Dennis Rader walked in, wearing a plain beige suit and handcuffs. He smiled politely, nodded at the judge, and sat down. No sign of fear. No emotion. Just calm, like he was attending a church meeting. The judge asked if he wanted to plead guilty. Dennis adjusted his glasses and said, "Yes, Your Honor." But what happened next wasn't normal. Instead of simply admitting guilt, Dennis Rader began to explain his crimes in detail. He stood up, cleared his throat, and started describing every murder, one by one, in cold, matter-of-fact language. He spoke about the Otero family in 1974, how he cut the phone line, entered through the back door, and tied them up. He described the way he planned every step, the knots, the timing, even the position of the bodies. People in the courtroom were trembling. Some couldn't hold back tears. A few had to walk out. But Dennis kept talking, almost proud of how smart he thought he was. He described his next victims, how he chose them by watching houses, learning schedules, and waiting until they were alone. He called these murders his projects, as if they were simple work assignments. The judge finally asked, "Mr. Rader, why are you telling us all this?" Dennis looked straight ahead and said, "Because I did it. It's my story." What Netflix didn't show you is how disturbingly calm he was through it all. No shaking, no tears, no emotion. It was like he was reading a report about someone else's life, not his own. As he spoke, the families of the victims sat frozen, forced to hear every detail of the pain he caused. The courtroom felt colder with every word he said. When he finished, Dennis Rader sat down, folded his hands, and whispered, "I'm sorry." But no one believed it. For the people of Wichita, it wasn't just an apology, it was a reminder of everything they lost. For decades, they had locked their doors, checked their windows, and prayed the nightmare would end. Now, the nightmare was sitting right in front of them, smiling. As the judge prepared to read the final sentence, no one could have predicted what Dennis would do next. The sentence, BTK's final words before life in prison. The courtroom was dead silent. Every eye was locked on Dennis Rader as the judge prepared to speak. For over 30 years, the city of Wichita had waited for this moment, to finally see justice served. The judge's voice broke the silence. Dennis Lynn Rader, for the murders of 10 innocent people, you are hereby sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison, without the possibility of parole. There was no applause, no shouting, just the sound of quiet crying from the families who had waited decades for this day. Dennis Rader didn't react. He just nodded slowly, as if he'd already accepted his fate. But what happened next left everyone speechless. As he stood to leave, Dennis turned to face the families of his victims. He cleared his throat and said, "I know what I did was bad, terribly wrong. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I wish I could take it back." The courtroom froze. His voice was calm, almost too calm. There were no tears, no cracks in his voice. It didn't sound like remorse. It sounded like routine. One of the victims' relatives yelled from the back, "You're a monster. You're not sorry." Rader glanced in their direction and smiled. Just a small, empty smile. That's the part Netflix never showed. That chilling smile. The one that proved Dennis Rader wasn't sorry at all. He wasn't trying to make peace. He was trying to stay in control, even in defeat. When guards let him out of the courtroom, he looked around like he was memorizing every face in the room, almost proud that his name would never be forgotten. Outside, reporters rushed to capture the moment. Flashing cameras, screaming headlines. BTK sentenced to life. But inside the police department, detectives knew something others didn't. Dennis Rader was already writing again. Letters, notes, drawings. From inside his cell, still calling himself BTK, still talking about projects, still feeding the darkness. And that's what made everyone realize. The prison bars might have stopped his hands, but not his mind. Inside BTK's cell, the hidden messages from prison after the trial, the world thought it was finally over. BTK was locked away. The city of Wichita could finally sleep without fear. But behind the thick, gray walls of El Dorado Correctional Facility, Dennis Rader was far from silent. From day one, Rader began writing letters to journalists, professors, and even crime fans who mailed them out of curiosity. He answered almost everyone. He didn't talk like a killer, he talked like a storyteller. He described his crimes, his thoughts, his fantasies. Sometimes he even drew pictures of his projects, just like before. In one letter, he wrote, "You want to know BTK? He's still here, just caged." What Netflix didn't show you is that Rader enjoyed prison more than anyone expected. He loved the attention. He loved knowing people still wanted to hear his words. Every letter he sent out made him feel powerful again, even without freedom. Detectives who once hunted him began to worry. They feared Rader was using his letters to inspire others. Or worse, to plan something through coded messages. So, the FBI began monitoring his mail. They analyzed every word, every drawing, every hidden reference. One letter mentioned future projects. Another listed names, all fictional, but eerily specific. And then came the most disturbing one. Rader sent a note describing how a student of BTK could continue the legacy. It wasn't just fantasy anymore. He was trying to teach. Even in prison, Dennis Rader was obsessed with being remembered. He wanted books, documentaries, and interviews to say his name forever. And the more attention he got, the more he wrote. But the part Netflix didn't show you, the part few people know, is that one of Rader's letters hinted at something hidden near his old home in Park City. Something he said was buried in the dark. When detectives searched the spot years later, what they found left them completely stunned. The backyard discovery, what BTK left behind it was a quiet morning in Park City, Kansas, years after Dennis Rader was locked away. But for the team of detectives standing behind his old house, the air felt heavy. They had just uncovered one of Rader's prison letters. Inside it were strange words. The secrets still rest in the ground. I buried my projects close to home. At first, the investigators thought he was bluffing, another one of BTK's twisted games. But curiosity won. So, they brought in ground scanners, shovels, and crime scene experts. They started digging behind the old shed where Dennis once kept his tools. For hours, nothing. Then suddenly, a dull metal sound. They had hit something. When they cleared away the dirt, they found a small rusted box wrapped in plastic. Inside were photographs, sketches, and notes, all matching the handwriting of BTK himself. The papers described the murders in disturbing detail. Times, dates, methods, even the names of his victims, written carefully like trophies. But there was something else, something the world never saw on Netflix. A map, hand-drawn, marked with red XS around several neighborhoods in Wichita. Each X had a woman's name beside it. None of them were his known victims. Under the map, he'd written 2 words, future projects. The detectives felt chills. It meant BTK had planned to kill again, maybe even long after his last known murder in 1991. The map proved he wasn't finished. He had only stopped because he was caught. Investigators later discovered more hidden items, rope, tape, and Polaroids wrapped in plastic bags. It was like Dennis had built a shrine to his own crimes, buried beneath his backyard. And when police showed photos of the discovery to Rader in prison, he didn't deny it. He just smiled and said, "Told you there were still secrets." That single line sent shivers through the entire investigation team. It proved one thing. Even behind bars, BTK was still trying to control the story, still trying to stay one step ahead. But what no one expected was that this buried box would lead to an even darker secret, one that involved his own family. The daughter's secret, life as BTK's child. When the news of Dennis Rader's arrest broke in 2005, the whole city of Wichita froze. But no one was more shocked than Carrie Rawson, his daughter. Carrie was at home when she turned on the TV and saw the words, "BTK Killer captured, Dennis Rader arrested." She stared at the screen in disbelief. Her father's face was there, calm, polite, and familiar. The man who taught her how to ride a bike. The man who prayed with her every night. The man who tucked her in and told her to always trust the police. She whispered, "No, that's not my dad." But it was. Her phone rang minutes later, an FBI agent confirming the truth. Her father was BTK, the killer who had terrorized Kansas for 30 years. Carrie's world shattered. Every memory began to twist in her mind. Family vacations, church picnics, birthday parties. How could the man who loved his family so much also murder 10 innocent people? She refused to believe it at first. She even thought it was a mistake, that maybe they had the wrong man. But when the court released the full confession, her hope died. She read her father's words, describing how he killed strangers in cold detail. And that was the day Carrie realized she didn't really know who her father was. What Netflix didn't show you is how Carrie tried to rebuild her life. She faced hate from people who couldn't separate her from his crimes. Letters poured in, some kind, others cruel. But through it all, she found strength in one thing: forgiveness. Years later, she decided to write her story, not to defend her father, but to remind people that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a smiling dad from next door. In an interview, Carrie said, "My father was a murderer, but he was also my dad. I loved him, and that's what hurts the most." She eventually visited him in prison, face to face. She said she saw 2 men that day, one who looked like her father, and one who looked like BTK. Dennis told her he loved her. But for Carrie, that love would never feel the same again. The story of Dennis Rader wasn't just about death. It was about how one man's lies destroyed an entire family. And for Carrie, every day since 2005 has been about learning to live with a name that will never fade. But what no one knew was that years later, Dennis Rader's name would return, once again connected to new investigations. The new investigation: did BTK have more victims? Almost 20 years after Dennis Rader was locked away in a Kansas prison, the name BTK suddenly returned to the headlines. At first, people thought it was a rumor, a clickbait story. But this time, it wasn't about Rader's old crimes. It was about new ones. In 2023, the Osage County Sheriff's Office announced that they were reopening a cold case from 1976, the mysterious disappearance of Cynthia Dawn Kinney, a cheerleader who vanished after leaving a laundromat. No body, no clues, no answers. For nearly 5 decades, her family had been waiting for closure. But now, after so many years, one name surfaced again: Dennis Rader. Investigators discovered that during the time Cynthia disappeared, Rader had been working just a few miles away. He even wrote about projects in his old journals, chilling words that matched how he used to label his victims. One entry stood out: Project Laundromat. That was enough to make detectives dig deeper. They searched Rader's old property in Park City, the same place where he had built a life as a husband, father, and respected church leader. But under the surface, they found signs of something darker. Beneath a concrete floor, police unearthed what they described as possible evidence of trophies. Old chains, ropes, and a small piece of fabric, all buried for decades. Even more disturbing, they found sketches, hand-drawn maps of possible murder sites, and letters filled with Rader's handwriting, describing unfinished business. It seemed BTK wasn't done after all. When reporters asked Sheriff Eddie Verdon if he believed there were more victims, he said, "We can't say for sure yet, but we're not ruling anything out." The possibility of more victims sent shockwaves across the country. Families of missing women began contacting investigators, wondering if BTK was behind their pain too. When asked for comment, Dennis Rader responded from prison in a chilling tone. "There are things out there that haven't been found yet." That single sentence sent a shiver down the spine of every investigator. Was he teasing them? Or confessing something real? One agent said, "Rader loves control. He loves knowing we're still chasing him." And that's the truth about BTK. Even from behind bars, he wanted the world to remember his name. He fed off the attention, the fear, and the headlines. Every new clue was like oxygen to him. But for the families of those who never got answers, these investigations reopened old wounds. Each discovery, each hint, forced them to relive the horror. As of today, police are still searching for solid proof that ties Rader to new crimes. But one thing is clear, the BTK story isn't over. It's still unfolding, slowly, eerily, piece by piece. BTK's prison letters, the mind of a monster inside El Dorado Correctional Facility. Mail arrives every morning. Most prisoners get letters from family or friends. But Dennis Rader's letters? They come from strangers, reporters, criminology students, even curious fans. And Rader replies to almost all of them. Each letter is written carefully, like he's crafting a story, not a confession. He calls himself Bill, short for bind, torture, kill. It's like a nickname he's proud of. In his handwriting, investigators notice something odd. He switches between calm, polite sentences and dark, emotionless details. One moment, he writes about gardening or church life, and in the next, he describes projects with frightening precision. "I see the scenes over and over," he once wrote, "but it's just memories now locked inside." What makes these letters even more disturbing is how Rader talks about his legacy. He wants people to study him, to learn from BTK. He even suggests writing a book himself to help law enforcement understand minds like mine. But detectives see something else. They believe Rader is still playing games, controlling how the world sees him. Every word he writes is part of a performance. Every detail is designed to keep his name alive. FBI analysts who read his letters say Rader's tone hasn't changed in decades. He still enjoys power. Even locked in a cell, he's pulling strings, deciding what the world should know and what should stay buried. In one 2021 letter, he wrote, "They think they caught BTK, but they only caught the man. The factor still lives in their minds." Those words sent chills through investigators. Because it showed he didn't just want to be remembered, he wanted to haunt people. Psychologists studying his case say Rader fits the profile of a power control killer. That means his real thrill didn't come from violence itself. It came from the fear and obsession he left behind. Every time a new documentary or YouTube video mentions him, Rader feels victorious. He once told an interviewer, "BTK is my art. I was just the artist." But what Netflix didn't show you is that some of his prison letters may hold clues, real hints, about where his other victims could be. Buried between drawings and coded words, there are strange references to places investigators haven't fully explored. That's why, even now, detectives still read every single line he writes. Because somewhere in those pages, the truth might still be hiding. BTK's daughter speaks. The family secret before the world knew Dennis Rader as BTK, his daughter, Carrie Rawson, knew him as Dad. A quiet man who taught her how to ride a bike, who went to church every Sunday, and who tucked her in at night saying, "Love you, kiddo." For Carrie, her father was everything a good dad should be. Kind, funny, protective, and always there. He worked as a compliance officer, volunteered at church, and kept a perfectly trimmed lawn. So when police arrested him in 2005, Carrie thought it was a mistake. She laughed when she first heard the news on TV. There was no way her dad could be BTK, the same monster who had terrorized Wichita for decades. But then, the truth came crashing down. DNA evidence, letters, photos, everything pointed to him. Her father, her hero, was BTK. Carrie described that moment as the day her world split in half. One part of her still loved the man who raised her. The other part couldn't believe what he'd done. She said, "It's like living in two realities. One where you were safe, and another where you never were." After his arrest, Rader tried to reach out to his daughter from prison. He wrote letters to her, long, emotional, sometimes apologetic. He said he loved her, but he also wrote about his projects, as if his dark side and his family life were completely separate. Carrie refused to read most of them. She needed time to understand how her dad could be both the father she adored and the killer who destroyed so many lives. In the years that followed, Carrie decided to speak publicly, not to defend him, but to help others heal from hidden trauma. She became a voice for victims' families and for children who discover their loved ones aren't who they thought they were. What Netflix didn't show you is how much courage it took for her to face him again. In 2018, she finally agreed to write him back. She told him that she forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because she needed peace. Her story shocked the world. People realized that behind every criminal, there are families who suffer too. Families who carry the scars forever. Carrie once said in an interview, "I'll never stop being his daughter, but I'll also never stop being my own person, the one who broke free from BTK." And that's what makes her story so powerful. While Dennis Rader wanted control, his daughter found freedom. While he lived in darkness, she chose light. But even with all her strength, there's still one secret Carrie never fully shared. A final clue her father left behind. One that might explain why he did what he did. BTK's final secret. The truth he never told for years. Detectives, psychologists, and journalists have asked the same question. Why did Dennis Rader do it? He wasn't poor. He wasn't abused. He wasn't insane. He had a wife, 2 kids, a house, and a steady job. So what made him become BTK? Bind, torture, kill? When Rader was arrested, he gave a chillingly calm confession. He talked about his victims as if he was describing a normal workday. He said he was just living 2 lives. But even then, something didn't add up. Years later, during a prison interview that never made it to Netflix, Rader said something strange. He told a reporter, "BTK was born long before the first project. I just didn't know his name yet." Those words made investigators dig deeper into his childhood. What they found was disturbing. As a teenager, Rader kept secret journals, filled with drawings of women tied up, bound, and gagged. He wrote about the Factor, a dark force inside him that whispered commands. He described it as a voice, one that pushed him to act out his fantasies. But psychologists believe there was no Factor. It was Rader's way of separating himself from his crimes, to make BTK sound like another person entirely. Still, in one of his last recorded letters, he hinted that there was something more. He wrote, "There's a reason for every knot tied, every mask worn, every game played. You just have to look at the pattern." When investigators re-examined his crime scenes years later, they noticed something eerie, a symbol repeated across several locations. A small triangle with a circle drawn inside it. No one ever understood what it meant. Some say it represented his fantasy of control. Others believe it was his secret signature, a code only he understood. In his final letter before stopping all communication, Rader ended with one line that still confuses investigators to this day. "BTK isn't gone. He's just waiting for someone to understand him." That single sentence left everyone uneasy. Was it a threat? A message? Or a warning that his story isn't truly over? Even now, detectives occasionally revisit the BTK case, still searching for missing links, still trying to decode his mind. Because with Dennis Rader, nothing was random. Every move, every word, every clue was part of his twisted design. And maybe that's what he wanted all along. Not just to kill, but to make sure we never stop talking about him. And that's the untold truth of the BTK Killer, the story Netflix didn't show you. A story of control, obsession, and a darkness that refused to die. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because we have even darker, deeper stories coming your way. Real stories that the media never told you. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, And remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who look just like everyone else.